Hello, everyone. Hello. So, first of all, thanks for attending this webinar today, produced with IFF about alternative proteins. So, before we jump into the topic, I would like to provide you some context. First question, basic one. Why are we talking today about alternative proteins? Our food system accounts for more than 1/5 of global current greenhouse gas emissions, and livestock is responsible for 15% of global emissions. So, as the demand for animal-based food products is increasing faster than the rising global population, novel strategies for food production are more important than ever. So, in that sense, alternative proteins could be our next heroes, sourced from plants, but also fungi, tissue culture, but also insects, to replace conventional meats or conventional seafood and a lot of different animal-based food products. They need fewer inputs, but offer more sustainable diets. So they could dramatically impact how and what we'll eat tomorrow. If we're here today, it's to learn a little bit more about consumer expectations in the field, in the space, but also key challenges to overcome. What are the latest trends in the market? And we'll have a panel discussion to cover strategies and insights to unlock the potential of two different technologies, precision fermentation on one hand, and coated fish on the other hand. So before we start with the topic, let me introduce you to our speakers today. So first, we have the chance to have Mihir, who is CEO and co-founder of Umami Meats, a Singaporean company that aims to revolutionize seafood production with coated fish. We also have Anastasia, co-founder and CEO of Melt&Marble, a Swedish company tapping precision fermentation to make more sustainable fats. We also have the chance to have Sonia, Global Innovation Marketing Leader at IFF, who is going to take part of the discussion. And as for myself, I'm Cécile, and I'm a Senior Deep Tech and Innovation Consultant at Hello Tomorrow. So just for you to know how it's going to take place, we have like this tab on the right side of Livestorm. You can ask your question directly in the chat, and at the end of the webinar, we'll have like a 10 minutes Q&A session to cover all the questions, hopefully, that you have. So, Sonia, the stage is all yours for consumer insights. You are on mute.
Thanks. So thanks, Cécile. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this webinar where, as Cécile explained, we will discuss the challenges around alternative protein and especially new technologies, because it is really something that could and will change the way we are seeing food and the way that we eat. And to start, I would like to recap that on the challenge that we're facing, it's really linked to a growing global population, and this growing population will demand an increase in food of around 70%. This is putting a tremendous pressure on nature, on land, on water, and a lot of other things. And this is really something that the consumers are more and more aware of. And this is transforming their needs and their requirement into food. So what does that mean? At IFF, to better understand the consumers, we are exploring society, people, and consumers' trends to predict the future needs and translate them into trend-driven innovation. Looking at understanding human motivation rationally, emotionally, and to understand the aspiration of the consumer of tomorrow is something that when we put these together and we look at the alternative protein segment, we were able to identify 5 key lifestyle territory. And that's the one that you're seeing on the screen, experience amplified. That is really what the consumer everywhere in the world are looking for. Cultural anchor, critical and ethical, health and well-being that is staying very important, and planet first. So then when we look at this, we are identifying new consumers that are having different type of need, because today the era of alternative protein is not anymore about the vegans and the vegetarian. It is about the entire population. It is about consumers reducing their animal-based intake. And when they do that for various reasons. There's not one reason around, in fact, that. However, they all have one requirement, is to have food that stay good. So taste is definitively remaining king, as a new consumer will have choices, and therefore they will not compromise. So this is making the job, I will say, of the industry to design new food even harder. However, when we look and made different, in fact, research, we saw that 40% of the consumers globally prefer a combination of different type of protein. Then, if we dig into how do they see new technologies, 3 out of 10 American consumers say that they would not be interested in trying cell-based meat. And it's even more important numbers in Poland or Germany, where we find that more than half of the population is interested in trying if the new technology will make product closer to meat. So again, putting taste as really a key requirement, taste and texture as a key requirement. And very interestingly, an element that we found is that if we try to go into different type of products that could use new technologies, 40% of UK and US consumers were willing to try cultivated meat, whereas 65% are willing to try cultivated cheese. And this is clearly an interesting insight, showing that depending of the type of food, we do have different, I will say, willingness to try at potentially faster adoption. So food that are used as ingredient paired with other food used as snack could be a first entry into new technology for the consumers. And to basically conclude, if I could say, what is important is when we understand those consumers is to understand where they are and to understand on which segment of consumer they are part of. And it's not only about understanding consumer at a global level, it's about understanding their value, understanding what their needs are in their country to help to design the right product at the right place. And it is critical for mass market adoption to bring alternative protein as an important part, in fact, of diet, because it's how we could elevate those type of product and make them a center of the plate. So important to keep in mind that sensorial taste and texture, a healthy diet could be the drivers to bring consumer to new technology. So really to elevate alternative protein to the next level in sensory nutrition and sustainability. So we could design the food consumer crave for. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Now, Cécile from Hello Tomorrow will explain you what is feasible on new technology, which timeline, and the challenges that are remaining. Cécile, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. So yes, let's have a closer look at the alternative protein space in terms of trends, but also roadblocks to overcome. First, from an end consumer point of view, we see that alternative proteins today cover a wide range of end products with a lot of different formats, sizes, etc. The two biggest submarkets are the meat one and the milk and dairy one. They are covered mainly by plant-based, which is the most mature technology today on the market. Meat and seafood, if we have a closer look to these two little submarkets, they first offer mainly ground meat and ground seafood. Why? Because it is easier to process in terms of production, so in terms of scalability. Ground meat is going to be sausages, nuggets is going to be patties, so processed meats you will find in your plate, basically. However, there is a lot of innovation when it comes to trying to better mimic conventional meat we can find on the market and close the gap in terms of experience. So a lot of innovation here in the meat industry, seafood, which is smaller right now, but gaining a lot of traction, a lot of innovation around cell-based seafood, also trying to target more premium products. When we have a look to the milk and dairy subsegment, it's also a big one, especially when it comes to plant-based alternatives. When it comes to plant-based, you can already find a lot of possibilities in the supermarkets worldwide. In the dairy field, a lot of innovation more around microbe-based products in the yogurts field, plus in the cheese part. The egg subsegment is a small one today because it's very tech-intensive, but we have two different types of business model and products. B2B, which is going to be more egg whites, and B2C, which is going to be more scrambled eggs, for example. Functional shakes and powders, it's increasing in terms of interest. Why? Mainly B2B, but it's going to be isolated proteins trying to upgrade, to improve the experience consumers can have with, for example, plant-based patties with additional specific properties in order to, again, close the gap in terms of taste, experience, and texture to improve the end consumer satisfaction. Finally, for the pet food, so this one is the main one when it comes to insect-based proteins. Why? Because we don't have the yuck effect that can have when we're talking about human food. So I just mentioned end product categories. Here is a list, non-exhaustive, of different actors you can find on the market. So a lot of actors are entering the market with different technologies, can be cell-based, can be plant-based, but also fungi, microbes-based, and insect-based. So 4 different pillars. And what we can see today, it's a really small and niche market. It weighs 1% of the global protein market, but in terms of forecasts, it could reach 11% by 2035. So a big growth. We have a dedicated section for the fat and flavors. Why? Because a lot of startups and innovations that try to focus on only one protein to try to give better attributes when it comes to sensory or nutritional aspects. I talked about different technologies, the mix of different actors we could find in the space, but how mature is it today? So we have here the 4 pillars: plant-based, animal cell-based, microbes-based, and insect-based. Plant-based is the most mature in the field. Why? Because it appeared on the market a few years ago. So in terms of process of production, it's already well known and not a problem anymore when we're talking about scalability. It covers a wide range of end products, milk, meat, seafood, functional liquids and powders, and so on. And consumers also know what is behind. So they know what are the characteristics and the attributes when they were consuming a product. So in terms of acceptance, it's really high. Animal cell-based, it's a smaller market, more mature when we're talking about meat and seafood, but the only country that has approved today animal cell-based meat or seafood for sale is Singapore. So this market is struggling with regulation and regulatory limitations in a lot of different countries. So trying to navigate between that. Plus, in terms of scalability, a lot of challenges. We're going to tackle that during our panel discussion, but still a lot to be done in this industry to scale. Microbes base, it's going to be everything coming up from algae, but also fungi or yeast, which is a part of fungi basically. Bacteria too. So it's going to be a process of fermentation, different types of products, dairy products, which are going to be full, like whole products, but also isolated proteins through different processes such as precision fermentation to improve current products on the market, mainly plant-based, in order to create hybrid products. And finally, insect-based. So few segments today, it's really focused on functional liquid and powders, pet foods, and whole insects. holding sex when it comes to human food, but again, in terms of consumer acceptance, still struggling a little bit. So what is next? I talked about end product categories. I talked about technologies. Let's have a look to the future. So in the short term, there would be new and improved protein sources that are going to emerge in order to offer new, different products on the market. New technologies to improve extrusion methods, meaning how to better mimic what is currently on the market, like beef sex, that kind of things, that are harder to produce as a whole. And many food players will increase also their investments in the space, because today we have very fragmented markets and we need connection. We need a network between the different type of actors. Then when we have a look to the midterm, so a more flexible regulatory limitations, especially when it comes to fermentation-based and cell-based products, hopefully is going to be worldwide, depending on the region. Precision fermentation will find more applications in what we call hero ingredients, filling the gap in terms of taste, texture, nutritional benefits too. And finally, consumer acceptance will increase due to the fact that we'll find more products on the market. Long term, so more than 10 years, hopefully price parity will be reached for many cell-based products, but that will be a condition if the price of the process, so for example, bioreactors or the price of the media is going to decrease. And finally, massive adoption of meat and dairy microbial alternatives. A lot of actors are entering the field and we'll have more and more hybrid products on the market. Finally, what are the key roadblocks to overcome? So that's a lot of opportunities we were talking about, a lot of different possibilities in the future and see these different techs at scale, but we have still a few barriers to overcome. First one is consumer acceptance, depending on the technology, but also the type of products. People, as it was mentioned by Sonia, are looking for more and more sensory experience in terms of taste, texture, but are also looking for sure at the price parity with conventional products. Production costs, because if we want to reach price parity, we have to look at the production costs today that are sometimes still really expensive and only at the pilot stage. Then regulations, ethics, that's the case, I was mentioning it when it comes to cell-based meat, for example, or cell-based fish. So still educate people with these new products appearing on the markets. And finally, technological scalability, because it's still working sometimes at a small scale, but not the case when we're talking about industrialization. So that's all to give you, I would say, an overview of the market, about the trends, about the type of actors you can find. So it will be easier for you to navigate through this panel discussion that will start. So I'm just going to ask this first question, which is, we see a lot of opportunities, a lot of barriers today on the market, but globally, we have a lot of actors that are entering the field. I would love to hear Anastasia and Mihir about, okay, why did you decide to launch your business at first? What was the problem that you identified on the market that you wanted to tackle in order to enter these new emerging booming markets? So maybe Anastasia, if you want to answer first about Melt&Marble, that could be really insightful.
Sure. So we are working on tackling this taste gap. So basically what we realized is that, there has been like a lot of innovation around making better and better products. But when it comes to a lot of alternative meat, dairy, and other products, there is still this gap when it comes to taste. And this is largely because the sensory properties of plant-based fats, which are the fats that are being used right now, are completely different from the sensory properties of animal-based fats. So we're talking about different mouthfeel, different flavor, different functionality in general. So basically, this is what we're trying to fix, and we're doing this by using precision fermentation. So we essentially developed a precision fermentation-based technology platform that allows us to engineer yeasts to produce any kind of animal or non-animal fats. So basically, we can use our platform to produce, let's say, beef fats, dairy fats, or etc. And the idea is to basically create fats that really have the same functionality that animal fats do, and therefore help bridge this taste gap and hopefully make these products taste better, and also then make more consumers want to buy these products.
Thanks a lot. That was really clear. So again, about experience and consumer acceptance. Mihir, what about you?
So I think we come at this actually from a similar point of view. I was previously working in a venture studio helping build technologies for fish farms, including disease management tools, so things like vaccines and diagnostics. So that was what brought me from traditional biochemistry and pharma into the food industry, and very quickly realized that things that I thought were very sustainable had many challenges actually on the road ahead, and that Cultivated presented a way to create a similar experience for consumers, but without some of the bottlenecks when it comes to genetics and breeding and disease that traditional fish farming was facing. So Umami Meats was born from this idea that we could create the same experience that didn't leave consumers feeling like they were being asked to leave behind a part of their culture and their cuisine, while still creating a more sustainable system that made the choice easy for consumers to switch as opposed to making them sacrifice. And along the way, that sort of evolved into production technology, and our focus at Umami is now manufacturing a process that can be brought to scale and can be put in multiple factories around the world that are run by partner companies, so that we can take Cultivated from promise to reality. Because I think if we talk about trying to replace, let's say, even 5 or 10% of supply, or fill 5 or 10% of the gap that's forming between now and mid-century, that is a tremendous undertaking for any one company to consider, number of factories, number of consumers to reach. And so at Umami Meats, we're working on producing a system that makes delicious and healthy and nutritious cultivated seafood, and then bringing that to brands around the world so that they can bring products to consumers in local cuisine and with a local flair.
Thank you a lot, Mihir. And I have an additional question for you. So you were talking about fish. Why did you decide to go for fish, for example, instead of meat, as we see a lot of actors in the meat industry today?
Yes. So I think one of the reasons was my personal background in the seafood industry and recognizing an opportunity in that market based on the supply constraints it was facing. And I think the more we thought about seafood versus meat, the more it made sense to start in fish for a few reasons. So one, on the supply side, seafood for many species is one of the products that we still catch from the wild. And so we can't produce more actually at any price with current technology. And so that creates an interesting opportunity for a new technology where cost structure will be a challenge and production volumes will be a challenge early on, because you can fill a niche in a way that nobody in the world can today. And so that creates an opportunity to bring new tech to market where there's consumers pulling it into the market, as opposed to trying to educate consumers where they have existing options that they're happy with. And so those two things combined, sort of supply constraints and growing demand, felt like a really strong combination to work in.
Thanks a lot. So you were talking about this growing demand for this kind of product. Same, I would say, on the mid-size, but we're talking about more the experience from an end consumer point of view. And if I go back to Anastasia, what I would like to understand is you were talking about meat, but also dairy, which is the kind of product we're targeting right now.
So the first application that we are targeting is meat, but we'll also have dairy fats in the pipeline as well. And we'll also see that for some dairy applications, the meat fats that we are producing could actually also have like some quite interesting properties. So we're looking into that as well.
Okay, very clear. So we cover different types of end products. So that is really interesting. And what I would like to know is, okay, we have two different type of end products. We have two different type of technologies behind. So Anastasia with precision fermentation, Mihir with cultured fish. Sorry. So there were two really new technologies. So what kind of challenges did you face at the beginning? What are challenges you are still facing today in the industry? I don't know if Mihir, maybe you can start this time.
Sure, happy to. So I think there's a few challenges, some that are unique to seafood and some that are common amongst anyone in the cultivated animal cell sector. So the common challenges, I think, are number one, cost to produce and figuring out how to bring that down as quickly as possible, even without economies of scale in the early phases, is one major challenge, and I think one that we and everyone else are still working on. But I think now that the enabling industry is coming along with us, that journey is getting much faster than it may have looked like a couple of years ago. We also have challenges with getting to industrial scale in the food sense. And when we talk about large volume, large scale from a bioreactor or a cell culture reactor perspective, we're talking about tens of thousands of liters, but realistically tons. When we talk about a food plant, people are usually talking in kilotons or in hundreds of kilotons on a plant basis. And so that is an order of magnitude difference that we really have to assess. Do we think about this in the same way, or do we see a reason to move away from large centralized production to smaller localized production where the economics still work? And that's going to be a challenge for some time, figuring out how big of a scale do we need to get to. And then in seafood, I think there's a unique challenge, which is how do you get the cells from fish? And in particular, we're focusing on these endangered species that can't be farmed. So we have to find ways to get them from the wild when they have extensive permitting in place because they're endangered species. And so trying to find partners who have research licenses, who have legal access to these species to help us source cell lines and to do so reliably has been a major learning our first couple of years. And it's new every time we work on a different species because we're often looking at a different country or different import and transport regulations. So those have been some of the really big early challenges initially.
So if I got it well, there is a first part which is more around the process and how to find the good balance between like high, very important volumes and small scale. Is it something that you met to Anastasia at the beginning? Is it something you're looking right now?
Yeah, so like of course, like for us, like when we're thinking about like going from the lab scale to like really commercial production, so this means that like first of all, there's quite we have to scale the process quite a bit. So like go from let's say like 1 liter scale, which is what normally would have in the lab, to eventually 500,000 liters, which is like full commercial production. So like you really want to make sure that you have a very robust process when you're doing this. So yeah, like there's quite a lot of on the development, on the process development side, but then also having access to all of this scaling infrastructure. And when we're thinking about like the future, when we're actually like producing commercially, it's yeah, like it's the price, right? So eventually we want to be price competitive with plant-based fats, and to do this we have to really produce at really high scale. So then it's looking at what's available out there. There's a lot of CMOs, but most of them will maybe not necessarily be super cost competitive. So then we have to think about yeah, alternatives to that.
And you were both mentioning the fact that economic viability is quite something you have to think from scratch at the beginning, how to reach that price parity to be competitive. How do you, so you were talking about the process. Are there other ways? Do you target more premium products? Are there other things to take into consideration when we're tackling that price parity and the price side as a whole? I don't know, Anastasia, if you have something.
Yeah, so of course, like how we see this is that like in the beginning we can charge premium prices for our product. So we see that like most of the customers that we're talking to, they accept that because it's also, you get a premium experience. But of course, in the longer term, the prices do have to come down across the board if we really want to like have this major shift from animal-based alternative protein-based. So then, everything just kind of has to come down, and this will happen with scale, as well as like not just scale, but also you have to have like super efficient process. You have to have cheap feedstocks. All of these things.
Is it something you also do, Mihir? With you were talking about targeting more premium products and like different spices in the seafood industry?
Yeah, so I think choice of market is important, and that can mean a few different things. So it can be what product format do you choose, what market segment, and in our case, we focus on these endangered species. They happen to be premium, and that's certainly a benefit. So for example, if you look at a species like eel, which we work on, the wholesale prices can reach above $80 per kilogram, that's USD, wholesale for a whole animal going into a restaurant. And it's much easier to reach price parity at these kind of numbers than it is for a commodity salmon, for example. If you're trying to sell at $12 a kilo, that's a much tougher. If your production cost is what it is, one of those is maybe profitable, the other is very much not at small scale. So I think that matters quite a bit, but you can elevate many, many products by choosing the right segment. So there are high-end versions of salmon, if you go to the right restaurants, if you get into the right channels, where you can command a premium for parasite-free, antibiotic-free salmon. So I actually think it's more about finding the right messaging that resonates and finding the right segment that it resonates with, and not necessarily always just which product and which species.
Makes sense. Very clear. Very interesting. And I was wondering, so we're talking about the different challenges you faced. You mentioned mainly price, scalability too, but is it regulatory approval? Because I know, for example, that when it comes to cell-based fish, precision fermentation too, a lot of barriers in some countries due to regulatory limitations. How do you deal with that, and in which time frame? Mihir, I would love to hear your thoughts about it.
So we're lucky enough to be in Singapore, and so we have access to a friendly, small, easy to work with regulatory body at home, which is, I was born and raised in the US, and FDA can be very friendly, but is not small and does not move quickly, right? So there are trade-offs though, because an FDA approval carries weight in many other countries. A Singapore approval, because it's a very small country, doesn't have that same global influence. And so I think we are taking kind of a dual approach. We're working very closely with our regulator in Singapore, which is Singapore Food Agency, to develop the dossier and to understand the risk assessment, because they're so easy to communicate with. We can get very rapid back and forth dialogue. And our plan is to submit in Singapore while also preparing documentation for US FDA. And we're lucky enough that FDA is the only regulator we have to work with in the US for cultivated seafood, where the meat companies will also have to work with USDA, which can be just an additional layer to manage. And then we're looking at a few other markets that are very interesting, but we don't know exactly what those timeframes will be. So Japan is a good example where the market would be very interesting for cultivated seafood and some of the species we work with, but it's unclear exactly when a regulatory approval might be coming.
Okay, so maybe in the second timing, because first preferably working in the US. Okay, so that's clear for the cell-based thing. It's going to take time, but at least in the US, it's easier to proceed than when it comes to meat, like cell-based meat companies. What do you think, Anastasia, on your segment with your technology? Is it like a barrier today to enter the market, and to enter which market in which time frame?
Yeah, so we are lucky because for precision fermentation, it's a lot less barriers than cultivated products. Because of course, like precision fermented products have been on the market for many, many years now. So these frameworks do exist in many geographies. But what the challenge is that, of course, we still have to go through the regulatory journey. And for example, here in Europe, especially, so for us, it will be like this Novel Foods framework. And it's an established framework, so we know what to do. That's good. But it is quite long and it's also quite rigid, which is not great for an innovative developing company. So we also actually have to go to the US first because there it's just a friendlier framework. So basically, like we will launch out of there and then go back to Europe a little bit later.
Okay, so US first too. And Sonia, what do you think from an IFF corporate point of view in terms of regulatory limitations? If it's something you have to deal with, and do you have like a means to try to navigate into the regulatory journey more easily?
So first, it has been already well explained by Mihir and Anastasia on the challenges on both of the technology. And at IFF, we do have regulatory teams in the different regions and that are already basically working on just new technology to understand, in fact, the framework and what needs to be done depending on the region, basically in the world. So that's clearly the type of thing where we could engage with startup to provide, in fact, recommendation and support. But as Mihir also explained, on the part of cultivated meat or fish, this will require, in fact, for sure, some time. So that's where we are, in fact, today. But again, we do have regulatory teams that are already basically engaged in many places and are already well knowing the area of fermentation and those new technologies.
Okay, thanks a lot, Sonia, for the insight. So if I summarize a little bit, I would say in terms of challenges, what we have the price parity, process, also a big thing, and finally, regulatory limitations. You also mentioned, Mihir, the network and collaborations, also due to your business model currently. How do you deal with that? I mean, is it something you're looking for? Is it something you're licensing? Are you looking for a partner to go at scale?
Yeah, so this is something that we are navigating, and I would say we don't have a clear answer. I think we're open to a variety of models, but fundamentally, we think of this as an ecosystem where we create the core production technology, and then we can work with partners upstream and downstream in the long run. Initially, we keep more of the upstream in-house, so we're making our own cell lines, we're producing some media, but we do have suppliers that we work with on media who are working with us to develop, for example, a food-grade formulation, and they're taking on the challenge of making sure every input in the media is made to spec, was made in ISO 22000, can be brought into the food system. Downstream is where our biggest focus on partnerships is right now. So in actually taking manufacturing to scale, figuring out how to industrialize our process in a way that is reliable and repeatable, and then turning that into a variety of products and finding applications that are interesting to work on and that our customers would want to commercialize under own brands. But in the long run, you could imagine we can have a manufacturing platform with a specification, and companies or researchers could produce cell lines that fit that specification that we could be agnostic to. So anybody who bought into our technology and licensed manufacturing platform could access more than what we could create ourselves. I think there's real power in this ecosystem building. It definitely takes effort. It takes a lot of attention, especially as a small company trying to ecosystem build with very large companies. There's a management overhead kind of burden to doing that, but we think the long-term benefit is substantially worthwhile, and it's worth taking on some of the learning to work through corporate timescales and corporate approval processes to make that happen.
Really interesting. And I have two questions I have to say. First one would be more around the media, because you mentioned the fact that you were working in collaboration with partners to create a more sustainable media. So what we know from different studies is that the media is really costly today, and sometimes also from an ethical point of view could be a challenge. Is it something that personally you face? Are you working on it? Is it changing in the industry globally, or are you, I would say, the only one with Umami Meats trying to tackle that topic today?
So I think media has been a major focus. I sometimes think, unfortunately, a little bit too myopic of a focus, because at the end of the day, we care about production cost and efficiency. And efficiency is more than what does it cost for a unit, but it's easy to understand. Media is your consumable, right? So if you're working in steel tanks, if you're using cell lines are technically consumable, but they're tiny and they self-propagate. So really the bulk of your consumables comes from your media. There are certainly in traditional cell culture media components that are very expensive. So these could be some growth factors, animal-derived serum, or even just other proteins that are animal-derived components. And these are not just expensive, but they also have quality issues. They tend to potentially be entry points for pathogens of human concern. And so there are many reasons that we look at wanting to remove those components. The ethical ones you pointed out, notwithstanding, those are definitely, but I think even if they were ethically sourceable, you run into this issue of having quality control issues and potential introduction of pathogens. So there's kind of rational basis to move away from those. We are certainly not the only company working in this area. I would say many traditional media manufacturers, like companies like Merck and companies that are producing media for the pharma industry today at scale, are actively working on producing food-grade, animal-free media. And we welcome their help because they bring decades of experience to the table here, not only around what works, but what works at scale and what will work 5 years from now if we keep running it. And startups sometimes are very good at finding clever solutions where the supply chain may not be built, and then you run into a scale issue. So I think this is going to be an ongoing area of work for the next 5 to 10 years that will have working formulations. We have working formulations now that are animal-free, but working at scale, reliably, fully qualified are different endpoints. And that last one will be a long-term effort.
Thanks a lot. It was really insightful. And I have a question about like more maybe for you, Anastasia, related to the plant-based industry. What we witnessed on the market is there were like a double-digit growth for a while, and now, I mean, it's more flat. So I would ask first question, why? Like, what is the reason behind? Because I know that you're trying with Melt&Marble to like help these kind of plant-based players to improve their products. Do you know what is the reason behind? And is it like due to a problem of scalability of new hybrid products, or is something related to that?
Yeah, so I think it's probably not just, let's say, one thing, but I would say probably like one of the reasons is that for a lot of these products, the taste is not quite there yet. So there are a lot of products on the market that don't taste very good. And of course, also a lot of these products still tend to be a bit more expensive than the animal-based alternatives. So of course, like on the taste side of things, this is exactly what we are trying to fix. And a lot of companies are using all kinds of innovative technologies to basically create better and better products that are still have not been commercialized yet. So this is not something that I would be necessarily that concerned about. And of course, the prices, yeah, as I mentioned, like this is something that like has to come down on the whole in the industry. But I would also maybe like challenge a little bit that like it's all like doom and gloom right now, because I think like these decreasing sales should also be viewed in their economic context. So like right now, first of all, you know, like there's inflation, a lot of consumers are worried about cost of living. So this also maybe makes them a little bit less adventurous, a little bit less likely, again, to buy products that are more expensive, especially if they don't taste as good. So it's, again, kind of this combination of things. And of course, also a couple of years ago, we have been seeing like very, very dramatic growth, right? So when we're looking at like the potential slowdown right now, it's kind of also in comparison to this extremely high growth that we were seeing 2 years ago. So I would say like, yeah, we have to be careful, have a look at this. There's still plenty of brands that are growing quite fast. But it's also obvious that like there are still challenges that we have to solve as an industry. But we are solving them. So I think the growth will come back.
Okay, thanks. And question related to that. So kind of same question as Mihir, meaning that today, yes, we see a lot of actors in the field, in the sector. It's really fragmented. So we see a lot of innovation, new products, new proteins, and so on. But at the end of the day, like on the shelves in the supermarkets, there are not so many products today. So why, as precision fermentation has been here, like on the market for years, why is it struggling today to scale? Do you have like few examples of what are you looking like into to put your products at scale today?
Well, I would say like, so when it comes for like precision fermentation in connection with specifically alternative proteins, so this has not been around for that long, right? So like the first companies that have been using this, so like Perfect Day, the Every Company, etc., like they have just commercialized their products in the last couple of years. So of course, like, you know, you can't really build Rome in a day. So I would say that a lot of the companies are still quite young. Many of the precision fermentation companies that are out there are only now like getting the regulatory approvals or getting to this, you know, the scale that they need to operate. So I think it's also just a matter of time.
And would it help you to rely on a network of partners, and which ones?
Yeah, of course. I think it's always better to do things together than doing things alone, especially when you're, you know, a small startup and don't have all the resources in the world. So of course, like, I mean, for us, when we're thinking about partners, we're looking across the board. So we're looking at, for example, partners that can help us with production. So, you know, like having access to this production capacity. We're looking at partners that can help us with, let's say, maybe sales. So if there are like partners that already have like existing sales channels that we could potentially partner up with, this would make our life easier. And also then, of course, on the sort of product development side, like, so our business model is that we are intending to sell our fats to brand owners, but to do this in a good way, we will partner up with them to like co-develop products and really create like the products that are the best for them. So it's really partnerships across, all levels.
Okay, very interesting, thanks. And I would say, Sonia, as more a corporate point of view, do you have like a more corporate lens to know how is it working today in the field in terms of partnerships? Is it something that is like that we see a lot more on the market today, like partnerships between little startups bringing more the innovation tech on the table with corporates or investors that are going to help reaching time to market in faster thanks to the help of capex, infrastructure, regulatory teams, and approval, that kind of things.
Interesting question, Cécile. So there's no one answer, in fact, into that, because there's a lot of different partnerships that could be put in place, and they could all be at different, in fact, level. For sure, it will depend of the startup and what the corporate, in fact, are looking for. If I'm taking the case of IFF, basically we are really monitoring, in fact, the space, understanding what the startup, in fact, are doing, and how could we partner with startups that could help advance, I will say, the agenda in that space, meaning being faster and also being able to bring differentiation to the market. Another thing to keep in mind is, because when we're talking about that, it's about scale up, it's about allowing this new technology, but we as well are able to partner in the regulatory space, as I was mentioning before, as well as on the design of the product and helping the startups through our ingredients, flavors, to bring products that are aligned with what the consumer are looking for in terms of taste and texture. And we could as well work on the consumer understanding to see where the fits basically are. So again, this open to a lot of different options in terms of partnership that we are looking at on a daily, basically, on a daily basis.
Okay.
And I hope much more, in fact, to come in the future.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sonia. Thank you very much, everyone, I have to say. Maybe we can see, because I'm cautious of time, that we have 10 minutes, so we're good in timing. That's well done. I would just have a look to the questions that we have here in the conversation, in the chat. So maybe first one to Sonia. So is IFF looking into precision fermentation technologies or cell-based technologies today?
Yeah, so I will take first the precision fermentation one, and IFF is already active into this area. And IFF has a very long history of working with fermentation, has strong expertise in fermentation through starter culture production, as well as enzyme production. So we do have expertise, we do have, in fact, capacity. So that's an area where we could definitively work with the startups and support on the scale up potentially of the startup. Of course, it will depend on the profile and a lot of different things, but that's options that are possible. When we talked about the cell-based technology, we could engage on providing solution and especially designing the end product to ensure that they are fulfilling the taste and texture, using flavors and different ingredients to be able to provide the right, I will say, product for the consumers. So different, I will say, way of working on those different technology, but clearly a very important one that we are working on through our Reimagined Protein program, and that is definitively focusing on the next era of alternative proteins.
Okay, thanks a lot. Now I have a question for all the panel, I would say. So the question is, does the panel foresee the rise of manufacturing as a service? Because that's currently the business model that was mentioned by Mihir. So in the question, it's written like different seafood startups pooling to bring down costs, or would they stay in boundaries for fear of losing competitive advantage? And I think that could be interesting also to have your analysis, Anastasia, about is it something that you witnessed more maybe in the isolated protein space? So I would be glad to hear about your point of view, maybe Mihir first, and then Anastasia too.
Sure. So I think it's an interesting question. I think the biggest challenge is actually going to be not IP, but actually just differences in process that make it very difficult to share facilities until the tech is more mature. In the long run, maybe even in the next 5 or 6 years, we'll likely see technology approaches converge around the ones that have been proven in market, seem most likely to be successful. And then all the companies that are using that approach can likely start to share facilities. I'll say this is more challenging than in more mature industries because we just don't really know what the best way to grow fish cells is, for example. So many people are trying different approaches that require different hardware, different architecture. There's also this concern, I think, especially for companies that are trying to be fully integrated, about how they protect their process IP, where they may not want to file it. But I think that will settle as the industry matures. And once you have 10 factories, the chance of someone walking in and seeing, so you'll likely see better.
And how do you deal today with the IP thing? Is it something that you decide to separate to tackle the thing and to secure your product and business model at some point? Mihir, I don't know if you heard me. Maybe not. Okay, maybe Anastasia, so you can directly. No. Okay. I hear you. That's good. Mihir, go ahead.
Okay. Apologies, my internet looks like it's gotten a little unstable. In our view, ecosystem building requires sacrificing some IP for market share, right? So there's some level of maintaining critical core IP to be able to build a business long term, but doing everything behind closed doors is a very precarious approach because it means if you can't solve every problem, you get stuck. So we're looking at filing patents on certain aspects of the technology, but then trying to, maybe not true open source, but try to make available standards and sort of qualification criteria, as I mentioned, so that we can bring more partners in. And I think others are taking different approaches to this, and we'll see which one ends up becoming the de facto approach. Hopefully a more open one, because I think that'll help the ecosystem grow faster.
Okay, thanks. Very interesting. What about you, Anastasia? Is it something that you witness on the market with precision fermentation, or is it still really in-house when we're talking about the tech today?
So when it comes to manufacturing as a service, this is actually already being done on the market. So as I mentioned, like there are like CMOs, so contract manufacturers, that are specifically, their business model is to take your strain and then run it in big bioreactors to produce your product. One of the issues for, let's say, food companies with this model is that a lot of these CMOs were designed for more expensive products. So they are maybe not super optimized in terms of like cost or scale. So for like a company such as ours, this is something that we can do at the beginning, but in the long term, it doesn't necessarily make sense. But of course, the other maybe side of this, and maybe what was also proposed in the question, is that yeah, you could have this concept of like maybe like teaming up with like a couple of other companies with similar technologies and essentially like maybe build a joint factory or maybe like some kind of at least joint let's say like infrastructure and then have separate factories around that infrastructure. This is something that could potentially work. It's, I mean, for us, like we are still a bit let's say young to look into this, but of course, like there are different models to make this work. Of course, depending a little bit on what your product and process look like, you might have different needs, but like, so maybe like you cannot run everything in exactly like, you know, with the same bioreactor and the same DSP, but the infrastructure around this could be shared. So this could be a very good model.
Okay, thanks. Very interesting. And one last question maybe for you, Anastasia, which is, what are your experiences with getting proteins from GMO and food products?
So we're actually not producing proteins. So we're producing fats. I would say, yeah, we don't really have much experience in, but I guess like this is coming more like from the regulatory perspective. And the main thing is that like you want to make sure that you get rid of the DNA as much as possible. So if you can do that, it's not a problem from a regulatory perspective. If you cannot do that, then it's a problem right now, depending on where you are. Definitely in Europe, it's a problem. In other regions, it's not as sensitive.
Okay, thanks. So I think we're running out of time. I don't know if Sonia, you have one last word.
Thanks a lot, Cécile, Anastasia, and Mihir. I think it was really interesting, and I hope it has inspired our audience. And for any additional, I will say, question, do not hesitate to reach out to Cécile or myself. Thank you.
Yes, thank you everyone for attending this webinar today. So you will have for sure the replay of the session directly by mail. So that's okay on that part. Same for the support. So it's going to be okay. In terms of news, if you want the latest news of Umami or Melt&Marble or IFF, do not hesitate to reach out directly to the speakers or go directly in the portals. Same for Hello Tomorrow. We have a lot of different webinars. So if you would like to know a little bit more, do not hesitate to directly subscribe to our newsletter. We're also hosting a global event summit on the 9th and 10th of March. So we can keep in touch there. So it was really nice to have this conversation with you guys today. Really interesting topic. So looking forward, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.